All right, welcome. So we're a group of professionals in the DC area. Our group started almost 10 years ago as a way to connect with colleagues in related fields to collaborate in helping children, teens, young adults, and families that we work with. So now I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll jump into things. So I'm Carey Heller. I'm a clinical psychologist and founding partner of Heller Psychology Group in Bethesda. I specialize in ADHD and executive function issues. I do formal testing, therapy, coaching, and run an executive function bootcamp. Via telehealth, I can provide services in Maryland, DC, Virginia, and about 24 other states. All right, Jill.
I'm Jill Broder. I own Jill Broder's Tutoring Center and recently started Broder Accredited Academy due to COVID. We work with students from preschool through college, whether they have learning disabilities, ADD, or any other thing going on. We try to give them confidence in what they can learn, and that's about it.
All right, great. Pam.
Hi, I'm Pam Tedeschi. I am the owner, I'm an educational consultant, and I'm the owner of Tedeschi Educational Consulting, and I am also a certified educational planner. I help children find the school that will maximize their potential. My youngest clients are about 3 years old looking for preschools, and my oldest students are looking for either a gap year or a PG year, postgraduate year after high school. Some of my students have learning disabilities, some are just highly gifted, and some are being overlooked by the public schools that they're in, or they're just in the wrong school. I also give the SSAT test in my office individually, one-on-one, so they don't have to take it in a big group. And I visit many, many schools each year so I can find the best day school fit in the Metro DC area or the best boarding or therapeutic option nationwide.
Great. Joan.
Hey, my name is Joan Green. I'm a speech pathologist and assistive technology specialist. I wrote this book, Assistive Technology and Special Education. And what I do is help people of all ages figure out how to leverage the benefits of technology. So sometimes I'm working with parents, sometimes I'm working with kids. These days I'm doing a lot of online tech coaching. I also work with seniors, elders, very much into elder tech. So whether a person has trouble with communication, reading, writing, getting organized and productive, or just making life easier with tech, I try to help them through online tech coaching. And we just start with one brainstorming session and then take it from there, one session at a time.
And Nancy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nancy Hafkin, a psychologist in Maryland and Delaware. Work with adults, individuals, couples, and groups, and have done this for about 35 years. Some of my particular interests are ADHD, families with neurodiverse children, doing parent education for families with all sorts of issues, working with adults who have family of origin issues who are impacting their relationships, and people who are interested in personal growth with the idea of making their lives good to great most of the time. I see couples with a male co-therapist, my husband, Mark, which is a particularly impactful way of working with couples when issues are long-standing and change is necessary. And I already learned something when listening to you all, things I didn't know. So that's great.
All right, wonderful. All right, and so what we're going to do now is we're going to kick it off and just have a discussion on some of the topics that we often talk about and experience in what we do. So obviously, as part of our group, it really developed in large part to help us collaborate more effectively with people in related fields. So what I'm wondering is, let's think a little bit about how we can best collaborate, or professionals in general, how they can best collaborate with students, children, teens, and what happens when what gets missed when there's a lack of collaboration.
Well, the thing I just mentioned about I learned something by listening to people's introductions. Pam, this idea of being able to give the SSAT in your office one-on-one, I didn't know that you did that, and that's marvelous. Because I hear people all the time say, my kid has to take this test, that, they're really anxious, they're really upset, they don't do well with testing. Who knew? So glad to know that bit of information. So one of the things that I'm aware of is that I just pick up information all the time when I'm spending time with you all. And I really love that.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I think I always learn something new each time, and I feel like it makes me even better in what I do. Like, for example, we have a developed optometrist that comes sometimes, and there's a lot with testing that I pick up on now, and like recognizing this may be a vision issue and something to refer out for, just because I can obviously assess some aspects of it, but that's not really my area of specialty by any means. So recognizing enough when I'm doing testing to see this is something that might be helpful, whether it's with that group or other things I'm seeing, certainly recognizing the need for tutoring with the parents or school placement or technology. There's so much that I think we can do by understanding more about what others do, because otherwise a lot of times people operate very narrowly in their field. They may know a lot about what they do, but sometimes have no idea what other resources even exist in the community.
But I find a lot of the clients ask for a referral for something. So I think it's really important that we know the people that we're referring to make sure it's a good fit and to know what's available out there for our clients.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I also think too, in terms of being able to collaborate in ongoing work, it's really helpful when you know the other professionals. I think it makes it a lot easier to get in touch with them. And sometimes you can sort of have a meeting and just go through kind of all the different people you're sharing and check in. Whereas other times, if sometimes it seems like people are operating in such isolation that you may miss stuff. If, let's say, I don't know, a psychiatrist doesn't communicate with me, I have no idea what's going on medication wise. Or with tutoring, it's really helpful for me to know what the child or teen is actually working on and what's going on, what the school is seeing, because it helps me to be more effective in assisting the people I'm working with.
With you and I, if a client is having an emotional problem and I'm tutoring them, a lot of times I'll ask you if I can do certain things, pushing or holding back or little things to say, reminders or whatever. So it does do the yin and yang thing. What's best in my position, using you as a coach.
Brainstorming with some other professionals, you may find a solution that you weren't thinking of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I can think of lots of situations where we've talked about someone's come in with something that they've had an issue with, trying to figure out, how do we approach this? And even if it's someone in a field that's, loosely related, can often come up with great ideas. Just, problems like with the pandemic, obviously, we've all been through a lot with that, and certainly navigated, I think, together in a lot of ways.
What I found really helpful is I've helped a lot of colleagues behind the scenes. So once I know people, I think that they're much more comfortable calling me, and either we come up with some solutions behind the scenes so that they can be the ones to implement technology or try different things, but they don't know what exists, or I just help with one session, infuse technology using Zoom. So I come into their session and just show ways to make life easier. And it's so much better when we can all work together. I mean, I find it so frustrating with physicians. I've just been immersed in the medical world of elders. And if you're not on the same portal, they don't communicate with each other. So I think that it's important for us to be networking a lot with each other to really streamline what we do and get the best outcomes that we can for the families that come to us.
And I definitely agree. And yeah, I think even just the idea of how to communicate with other professionals is important, because it's hard. Some are easily accessible. You have an email address, they're responsive. Others, it's you're right. You can't send a message unless it's a portal, or some don't even have a voicemail. It's front office staff, and it's they can call you back randomly, but who knows if you're available. And so so I find certainly working with people well, I think even if they have like a front office staff, a lot of times you get to know someone well, they'll give you their actual email address or, other direct contact information. So it makes it a lot easier. Like I find with the professionals I work with, once I get to know them, it's, they're often will, give me, it's much easier than if I have a question or an issue to get in touch very quickly and communicate. But I find like each person I would collaborate with to figure out what's the best contact method for them. And so I work out a system with each person, whether it's, knowing that we can text to set up a time to talk, or, have secure email that we can use. Or in some cases connected up where, like, for example, with people I work with, I'll, set, with someone's permission, set up their email address into my portal. So when I send notes from sessions to people, I can send it to the providers and other people involved as well. And this way they have a record of, what's going on. But I think for each person, it's important to figure out how best to collaborate in a way that works for, people mutually.
Technology, it's easy to do a quick FaceTime or Zoom call so that you really have a face and a feel for the personality of the person. So with colleagues, oftentimes I'll say, can we just, meet online for 10 minutes just so that we can chat, and then we can use email after that.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely something to be said to sort of meeting, face to face if you can, or at least video face to face, even just once, just to sort of have that direct connection. I think it makes a big difference rather than just hearing someone's voice and having no idea what it's like to interact with them. I mean, I always think it's really interesting when, especially if you've talked to someone on for years and then suddenly you have the opportunity to actually meet them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of us have had experiences like that, where you talk to someone or even just see their name places for so long, and suddenly you get to actually connect, and it's nice to actually put a direct face with the person you're talking to and get to know them in a very different way.
I agree.
Yeah, and what do you guys think gets missed? So when each person is working in isolation in whatever they're doing with a client, what kinds of stuff do you think can get missed by not collaborating?
They may do two different types of remediation. So if you're working with the school, may be doing one thing, the tutor may be doing something completely different. And if we're not all on the same page, it may be too many different things that the kid is trying to do, and it may not help them at all.
But the other thing, like with Pam, with you and I, if I'm prepping a student for an SSAT, I can tell you, ask you, when do you want them to take it? Can we wait? They're not ready, or they're ready now, and I'm afraid they're going to lose it. So that yin and yang, relationship that we have just really helps the student much more than if we were working in isolation.
Right. And before you even meet the student, I can tell you he really needs help in math. You don't need to do the verbal section, or you don't need to do very much practice with the verbal section.
All right. So the idea of sort of by not collaborating, people can be kids or teens can be given sort of conflicting information. For example, if I didn't collaborate with a school or a tutor, if I'm working with someone and I'm, looking more globally at organizational skills, and someone they're working with is saying, you need to keep a planner in this or do some other thing, and I'm exploring, there's lots of options you could use, and we're saying something else, then it's, I'm going to sort of undo whatever system someone else has set up. And so,
to make sure that the other professionals that the student is seeing, and check in with that therapist or that coach or whoever the person may be, so that we don't give conflicting information.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and that's definitely important. I mean, on occasion, and I'm sure you guys probably have as well, where sometimes, especially if someone starts working with someone else, but they don't after you start with them, but they don't tell you that, and there's no logical thing where you recognize, oh, this is occurring, to even think to ask, and then suddenly you realize that there has all other service that at times may be conflicting, but by collaborating would make it more helpful. So yeah, so it's definitely important to always know, when you go into working with someone, what are supports they have in place and who they're working with, but also if they start initiating stuff, while you're working with them, to be aware of it so you can collaborate and, not be having this running sort of in isolation while someone else is working on something else.
And the opposite can be true. If my students are seeing a family therapist and a personal therapist and me, oftentimes I don't know when to reach out. I don't know whether it's my place to try to collaborate or not. Have you ever had that?
That can be hard too. And that is also an important point, that there are times where it can almost be problematic to collaborate too much or be too involved, because, if there are times where working in independence and, sort of, especially let's say you're trying to work with parents on being sort of, taking a step back and not being, helicopter parents in a sense. That the idea is there are times where it can sort of, you have to know where the boundaries are and what's sort of being too intrusive in terms of and that. And, there are also some professionals, especially for the mental health piece, where they may at times not want to be as connected on a regular basis because they may feel like that can negatively impact the rapport they have with the client. So I think you have to know kind of what the issues are that you're addressing and give enough information to be helpful without sort of overdoing it and, collaborating sort of too much on the day-to-day stuff.
I have another question. When you get a referral from a professional, is it your place to check in and give them updates, or do you just take the student or client and go from there?
Do you mean updates once you start working with them, or?
Yes.
Well, you would need a signed release and from your clients to do that.
Right. So you need a signed release. And I mean, I think that's a really interesting point, because I think if there's a direct need to get updates or benefit, I think that helps. I mean, I find, for example, like if I do testing and I don't work with a person again after I finish testing, while occasionally I do get updates from professionals on stuff, well, I'm sort of nice to know what's going on with the person. Technically, I don't have a direct need to have any update because I'm not working with them currently. But if it's someone that I'm working with on an ongoing basis, then it is really helpful to keep getting updates even after, I touch base with someone initially. So I think for collaboration purposes, if it's ongoing work with someone, I think the updates are helpful. But I don't think they're as useful or at times even necessary if you're not currently working with the person and don't have any direct plans to resume work with them.
You and I, oftentimes I'll come hit my head against the wall and need a new strategy, and I'll call you, even though you're not working with the client. I'll say, you tested so-and-so, let me tell you what's going on. What do you think? And that really works for me anyway.
Right. And so in that regard, I'm sort of happy to do that. In that regard, I think it's different because even though it's not someone I'm still working with, having had that background, it's still really helpful to, and I can still sort of, be helpful to it, in assisting with a particular. So I think in that regard, I think it's different when and I find this too, even occasionally there are kids I've worked with years ago that, if there's really not much information on them and someone is, trying to figure out, let's say, school placement or something else, sometimes, colleagues reach out to me of, kids I've not seen in several years that want assistance, whether it's from stuff with testing or, people I've done therapy with. So I think that there is that benefit even especially for kids you work with for a really long time, that I think that, I imagine tutoring too is probably helpful, even if, for example, kids that go off to college, a lot of times, when kids are in college, there's not usually that many people to talk to for collateral information. So oftentimes it ends up going back to people they're working with in high school.
I was thinking that collaboration also is useful for me because this work can be difficult and lonely, particularly as COVID has popped up. Our group used to meet in person, and I thought that was amazing. We tended to gather a lot of people for a lot of our sessions. And it's been one of the things that we could all count on as the pandemic has gone on, that we knew we had, we sort of pivoted pretty quickly to Zoom and have been meeting on a monthly basis ever since. I think it makes a big difference to have a sense of not being alone in trying to serve the people that we end up seeing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I feel like this group has been really great during the pandemic and in general. And so I feel like I often come out feeling very energized. That it's sort of new ideas. It's nice to have this collaboration. It's a nice support network. And it's sort of the idea you have to take care of yourself also, both sort of personally and professionally. And I think this group is a really great way to do that, to be able to help in terms of being more effective, and then obviously a benefit of that is being more effective in people we work with.
I think also if the parents hear it from 2 people or 3 people,
Good
we're
point.
all in agreement, they're more likely to take the advice. Jill and I had a student that we worked together with constantly, and it really helped this parent to hear that we were both saying the same thing about the child.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely true. And I find there are times where, especially for parents, that maybe it's harder for them to sort of be receptive to certain feedback. By having all the professionals being on the same page and giving them the same information, it can be really helpful. Whereas if you get parents that end up kind of splitting in a sense, where they end up kind of getting different things, different messages on the same thing from each professional, it then can be very confusing and make them less likely to sort of trust anyone on it.
Or else they take the one they like the idea better, and that's not always the right one.
Parents feel comforted when we give them a referral, that we know the person, that we pick the person for them. And so I get asked all day long for referrals, and I love that I know you all and I'm able to pick the right person that's needed.
Yeah, and I think it is really helpful with referrals, being able to give it to someone and you feel like you can speak with, sort of saying, I trust this person, I know they're going to do a good job. Whereas, if it's someone, even if it's someone, maybe has good reputation in the field, if you don't know them, it's different, because you could say, I think I've heard good things of this person, but I have no idea what my direct experiences are. And so, but I also think there's that comfort level, especially if it's hard for someone to feel comfortable to reach out to seek support for a certain thing, that knowing that it's a direct connection of someone that they're currently working with, I think can make it feel a lot more comfortable to be able to reach out and get things going.
I also like to be able, Jill has a lot of tutors that work for her, so I like to be able to say, Jill, my client said this tutor is great, and the next student I have that has similar issues, Jill, can that tutor work with this child?
Yeah, one is great too, because I think, sort of whether it's, being a solo person or a big group, I think getting to know different people in a group is really helpful. Like I've had experience, very positive experience too, Jill, with that, where it's like, certain tutors that, end up working with a lot of the kids I work with. And it's nice, and, so you can check in on multiple ones, or I know kind of their style and kind of, what they typically do and how to help support that. So it's really nice because then you get to know, the professionals even more. And, again, it helps further increase collaboration.
I recently gave referral from someone who was in this group that isn't here today, and his group was very big. So when the client called and asked for him, the client called me back and said, well, I can't see him for 6 months. Can I use someone else in the group? And I said, oh yeah, the group's great. Just, anyone. I just knew him. So it works both ways with knowing the people and not knowing the people and trusting the person, that their group is a good group.
Yeah, and I agree, because I think it's hard, because obviously there are some groups that are big, and there's nothing, and there are definitely a lot of benefits of having a bigger group because you can serve more people. But I think, knowing the actual person who's sort of running it can make you feel a lot more comfortable to know that, they vetted these people, that, they're highest quality possible, and you're not going to just get some random person. Because I think sometimes people are weary of a bigger group because they feel like, oh, I don't know, maybe the person who's in charge, but I have no idea what the other people are like. But you also have to trust that if the person running it, if you feel comfortable with them, they're going to want to do a good job, make sure that whoever is working with them is going to do an equally good job.
And many of our colleagues are very busy, and there is a long lag time. So it is nice to be able to give 1 or 2 or 3 names for referral. But when you don't know the people for number 2 and number 3, I tell my client that I've heard good things.
Yeah, no, I do the same thing. If it's not someone I know personally and sort of can't really vouch for them, I would say, I know this person has good reputation. I don't know them personally, but, or I've had, people that work with them, I've heard, but, I just haven't had the opportunity to really connect with them that much directly. But it's also, what's also hard too is, obviously the fit has to be right. So there may be times where someone works with someone or tries it out, and maybe it's not a good fit, but it's nothing about the professional. It's really just, it wasn't, meant to be in terms of, whether it's something about the personality matching up, or maybe the referral didn't make sense because the issues that they mentioned when they set it up really were not the actual issues.
I think one of the things I also appreciate is knowing a little more in depth what somebody does. You can always say, I do therapy, or I do testing, or I do tutoring. But when I hear all the nuances, or at least some of the nuances of some of the work, or the extensive breadth of it, sometimes I really feel a lot that I can refer without question. So I love that. I love all the things I've learned from everybody.
It's especially
Personality
helpful
of each of you.
when we do presentations. That's where I really learn a lot. One person, presents to the rest of us, and we can really interact and learn from each other that way. So.
Yeah, well, it's great because even though we've known each other for a long time, I feel like I'm always learning new things about each of you guys, in general, people in the group. Just because I think the more we talk, the other things come up, whether it's about a service or thing that we provide that maybe we just hadn't really come up before, or just other things that are useful to know. Because I think all of us, do multiple things. And so it's not like you mentioned the example of therapy. Obviously, some of us do therapy, but that's only a part of it. And there's obviously a lot more to that than just like that term. Like, right. I think obviously you mentioned sort of the, the couples work and, with your husband. So there's a lot of like different pieces of things that we do. Like, for example, I do sort of mix oftentimes between therapy and coaching, helping kids with keeping track of assignments, as well as, addressing, anxiety and kind of, other self-regulation issues. But, a lot of times I feel like when we talk, I think people think about, or like I see a lot where people will think, oh, I do therapy or I do testing. A lot of people forget I do both. And so it's just interesting because I think people certain people, I think, know me for one thing, some for the other. But kind of the same way, I think a lot of us have maybe 1 or 2 things that people know us for, but it may be different things based on who the person is.
During COVID, we all morphed a little bit. So to hear how we morphed and what we're doing and what new things, because I think we all are flexible and passionate about what we do. So I think there has been a lot of change during COVID.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think everyone sort of evolved. I think, part out of necessity, but I think also it's given everyone, an opportunity to figure out like, what do they really want to be doing with it? What works, and, how to sort of make the most of it. I think all of us probably use technology to some degree before the pandemic, clearly we've been using it far more. And I think in a lot of ways, I think it really, certainly I find it for a lot of, we're working with people being able to not have, kids have to, the only time they lose, let's say, from doing homework is the time meeting with me. They don't have to deal with commute time, or things like that. I feel like I, in some ways, get a much better sense of family dynamics of seeing what happens, so if, let's say a sibling is popping into the session, or you can sort of see how parents interact with kids. It's I think it's very different than sort of being it because they're in their home environment.
I learned a lot that way. I can tell you about the parents and the siblings and interaction and interruption and what a student has to deal with at home.
It's true.
Yeah, and I also think too, it's like even like when I work with kids on physical organization, in the past it would be, they would often take pictures or videos of their room or whatever we're going to do, and then we'd map it out, in my office. But now literally the room's right there. We can actually work on organization in the moment, and they're right there. Or sometimes I can see things. If let's say there are a bunch of clothes hanging out of the drawer behind them. Little things like that. They give me clues into maybe these are things we should work on, even if no one's ever mentioned them before.
And they share their screen, so you can see how they're organized, and you can have that, give them a task. I often find that students say that they know how to do things. And so I say, okay, let's do this. And they have to do it in front of you in real time, sharing a screen, and you see where they get stuck. Whereas other people might think, they're doing a lot of clicking, and so they must know what they're doing. And really it might be extremely inefficient, or they're just doing trial and error. And if I can share my screen and show them how I do something or how I have it set up, and then they sort of simulate it, it really, I find the sessions extremely helpful online.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I found that too, because when I'm working with kids in terms of, let's say, getting started on task or staying on task, it's fascinating because I can see them in real time. I have them do a screen share. So whether they're working on a paper or some sort of other assignment, they get going with it. I sort of see, are they staying on task? They keep clicking between different tabs. I mean, when they first open up the screen, if they have a million tabs open and they can't find what they need, that's sort of a red flag to start to recognize that part of it is there's too much going on their screen, and so they're getting distracted. Or what I notice, and sometimes what I'll do is we'll set it up where maybe we'll use, I don't know, Pomodoro timer or something where we'll work for a set period of time, but I'll like write down observations as we go. So like I'll watch them, the time mark, how long were they on task? Where did they get stuck? At what point did, let's say, jump onto ESPN, or so, and then after process it. And so I think it's really helpful because a lot of times kids are not always aware of what they're doing and where the time's going. So I think being able to kind of see it in real time, I think really helps a lot.
All those tabs across the top, that's a very big challenge for my students to close them.
Yeah, in general, I found that a lot too, that I don't understand. I think it's hard when the tabs are so small that you can't sort of see them. I think, and I'm sure, Joan, you can probably speak to this stuff even more than I can, but one of the things I use a lot of people is using grouping tabs. Like if you have to have tabs open, that might at least group them, because then this way you can collapse them more easily, so it's less at once.
Right, you right click on it and then you can give them a title, and then they're all grouped. that's a great thing to do, and then they just know not to pay attention to those colored tabs.
Yeah, I also find a lot of this stuff that I work with people on, or stuff that I use myself, or I feel like I learn from doing and then kind of pass it on, or sometimes I learn stuff from the clients I work with as well. Like if they've set up something that makes sense, it seems like a great idea. It's something I might use myself, or pass on to others as well. I think it's all about sharing information, both from professionals, but also clients themselves often have a lot of good strategies that by taking those and harnessing them, I think can be really helpful both to them and to others as well.
And during session, if he comes upon something that he doesn't know how to do, I'll say, how do you think we can find that? Why don't we Google that? And it's in real time. Let's figure this out together. You can see them because they share their screen, Googling what should I put in? And you want them to come to a time that they know how to Google something and find the answer, how to do it, screen share, whatever.
Right, exactly. And I think it's hard. I think a lot of times, people don't realize that there's a lot of times where people can get stuck trying to do things. And even just something is that, which may seem simple, such as, let's say, sending a teacher an email. A lot of times I'll work with kids where we'll figure out what do they need to send the teacher an email about, and we'll draft it. And like sometimes the kids, it's more the follow through that's hard. Other times they sit there and realize they don't actually know how to explain what they want to say. And so that's what often stops them from doing it. And so by being able to do that time, it really helps them learn how to do it on their own.
But I find that they're not resistant to sending the teacher an email. When we come to a problem that we don't understand something and we need help from the teacher, I'll say, let's send the teacher an email. And you're right, they don't know how often, but they don't think to do that. So if we write the email during session, maybe that will be something they can do on their own eventually.
Right, like that's the idea, like giving them the scaffolding to be able to do it on their own. But sometimes the first act, or even going back to what you mentioned earlier about something about the research amendment, like is helping kids if they don't know how to do it, come up with key terms and just like a step-by-step process that they're comfortable using that they can use on their own down the line as well. Or I mean, I found even with something that in theory should be fairly simple, such as checking Canvas or whatever the school portal is. It's interesting when you have kids show you how they're doing it. But I've definitely seen kids where the way they look at it's not very efficient, or they don't, even though they've used it for a while, may not necessarily know the best ways to actually view stuff. So then they may go class by class rather than like viewing everything at once. I mean, there are benefits sometimes of going class by class to see some stuff, but I think sometimes, if a kid's always going class by class, by the time they get to, let's say, the 5th or 6th class, they may not remember what they actually have to do. But by seeing how they actually view it themselves, it gives you a lot of good information to understand how they can be more efficient and maybe where some of the difficulties lie.
And then I make sure that everybody knows how to take advantage of the accessibility features. So on every single device, you can have things read out loud to you for free. You just have to enable it, or speak and have things typed. And it's not perfect, but a lot of kids are very tech savvy, but they don't think to use the features of their tech to save them time and make life easier. And so you don't have to think of yourself as being disabled, just tech savvy and really leverage the benefits. Just one session can make all the difference. And so often what I try to do is send an email afterwards and include all of the other professionals involved. When, I have permission and it is email, so it's not that secure, but I don't use names. I just link to YouTube videos or show features and give suggestions of next steps. And that pulls in all the professionals that are working with that student, and then they can use those same tools, because a lot of times people just forget to use it or don't know when to use it. And then you all can, help integrate it into their everyday routines. So that works really great on my end.
Yeah, and I think the idea of integrating into the everyday routine is really important because, if we work with people on these tools, tools I'm sure are great, but if the people can't implement them themselves at some point or don't think to, that can be hard. So that's where the work and the follow through of how to implement it. So like setting up as much as you can during sessions when feasible, but then having a simple way of, do you put this in a notes app so you can refer to it yourself? Do you have a sticky note? Something that gets people to really think for themselves how to actually take these strategies and use them on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think it's important to show them with their work how to use the strategies, because otherwise there is very little carryover. But if you do it with them and show them with their work how to do it, I think that your success rate of having them use the strategy is much higher.
Yeah, and I agree. I think because if everything's abstract, it's hard for them to visualize sometimes how to apply it. But yeah, if you're doing stuff with the actual work or tasks or whatever they have, I think that definitely helps. I mean, I find, like, for example, in the summer, even though a lot of times kids don't have work, I mean, sometimes there's summer work, but like I'll do things where we'll create like a Google Classroom account and basically, set up semi-fun tasks. And so it's not really about the time involved, because most things may take like a minute or two, but it's, maybe it's, they find, I don't know, if they like sports, let's say find a baseball article and emails me by a certain time. And so it like works on the follow through, but it's, trying to mimic as close as we can to school. But it's obviously a little different, but it's something like tangible, as opposed to if I just talked to someone and we talked about you should keep track of tasks this way, and this is sort of what you should do to see what you have to do. It's not going to be as meaningful as something very tangible. And so, but again, my point is it doesn't necessarily have to. Well, I think direct schoolwork, if that or whatever they have to do in real life, is probably the best option when that stuff's not always available. Or if it's so uncomfortable, it's so anxiety provoking, sometimes working on these skills first is something that's less anxiety provoking can then lead to better follow through on the anxiety provoking things.
Well, a simple thing like trying to find an assignment they're working on and they wrote math homework instead of a date or a topic or a section and chapter number. Something simple like that will take away some of that anxiety. Labeling your work properly so you can find it, not necessarily putting it in a folder online, because they're not going to do that most likely, but at least labeling it correctly.
Right, exactly. Or I mean, it amazes me how many kids open up, I see Google Drive and they're all untitled assignments, or there's no folders, so they can't spend so much time searching for whatever document they're trying to find. Whereas something as simple as creating a folder, or at the very least creating a folder for all the old stuff, and then going forward putting everything in a folder for the class and however else you might want to organize it, can make a big difference. But I think people just don't always either just don't think to do it, or I think because of like, well, because you have instant access to, let's say, the recent stuff, people rely on that too much without actually thinking about like a different way of organizing it. Then in the long term is probably going to be a lot easier.
And they would never think to delete some things from the year before. So that's really a big new idea for many students.
And hearing specifics like this helps me feel great confidence in referring to tutors, right? Because, or coaches, because I hear what's going to happen and I can actually say, I know this will be helpful. So.
Yeah, because I think also, I mean, in general, but especially at the beginning, I think when people can come away from appointments with something very tangible, I think that helps them. One, I think it gets their buy-in more into this process, but I think it also just helps them to feel like, oh, I got something out of this. Where if someone comes out of a session or appointment thinking, I have no idea what I just talked about, I don't know what I should do, or I don't feel any differently, even though like for therapy, for example, it's often a process, by having something tangible from the start, it often can help with sort of feeling like you're making and in reality are actually making progress.
And sometimes it feels like I'm not making progress. I have 2 new ones that have been very slow go, but those baby steps, the student bought into the fact that he can put music on very softly because he wanted it really loud while he was working, just in the background, and stay focused was a big deal the other day. So, the buy-in of the student finally clicking just is so rewarding. It's unbelievable.
I bet.
Yeah, and I think it's also the point of how rewarding I think what we all do is. I mean, I personally find it's great when one of my ultimate goals is to help people to do stuff themselves. And it's really nice when you sort of see you're kind of put the time in, and they're doing better in school, they're happier, they're more laughing, more downtime, and it's nice to sort of see that they're using systems, or even like a lot of times maybe we set up an initial thing and then they come upon themselves thinking, I like this idea, but I want to tweak this to make this more right, which is great. And that's really the goal, is to get that, because also since circumstances change, for all sorts of strategies, they may work now, but by understanding how it works and being able to change it themselves, like for example, going from high school to college, that often helps. Whereas if you're following kind of blindly, like what someone says to do, it may be helpful in that moment for that thing, but it's not going to necessarily be helpful long term if you don't know how to apply it to whatever changes next.
And I, reached out to this parent that I'm struggling with, and I felt like I wasn't making an impact. And she said, oh my goodness, no, we're not fighting at home. He's happier at home. No, I see a big difference. Whatever you're doing is working, where I felt like I was being unsuccessful.
Very cool.
So that's another collaboration with the family, actually.
Yeah, and I think the family, variety is often extremely important, and and it's also hard. It's like parents also are having a lot of their own issues. That obviously often feeds into the kids in a variety of ways.
So I guess we all agree, collaboration is really helpful.
Their own support too. And I guess, Nancy, is there anything that because I realize you work more with, I think probably more with adults than sort of the rest of us. Do you have any thoughts just from like seeing it from like the parental perspective with the adult clients that you see?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Oh, sorry. The question is, with the adult clients that you see, do you see difficulty where, in terms of like from looking like kind of like looking downwards at the like where they often struggle with kind of addressing their own needs?
Well, yes, but typically what's happening is it's not just the adult by themselves, it's the adult in the context of, all of their other relationships, including the ones with the support people who are in their lives. Because I'm tending to see people, again, who've got, kids struggling in college, or, young children who they're trying to figure out what in the world's going on with them. So once they have the resources, once they understand what's going on, that's huge. Then I can work with helping them deal with their feelings and their reactions about it, to strengthen them to get through whatever it is they're going to have to get through.
A lot of times parents are on a different page when the father says one thing, the mother says another, and having somebody like Nancy step in and kind of try to help them get on the same page will make the child's life a lot easier.
I think that's true, huh?
Yeah, and that's also very challenging when the parents are not on the same page, especially if they're giving their kid mixed messages, or they're not agreeing on how to. Because sometimes I think there are times where if parents really disagree on stuff, like nothing gets accomplished in terms of, seeking support. Like one parent really wants it, the other doesn't. If they can't come to agreement, a lot of times nothing happens in terms of trying to make things better.
I find that the mothers are there, and a lot of times they're micromanaging the child, or they know which tutors they're going to see, or they're more in contact with the school quite often. And the fathers may be doing something different. They're very busy at work, and they're not as involved, so they don't know the extent of their child's difficulties sometimes.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
therefore they're not on the same page.
I deal with a lot of divorced parents, and so I make it very clear that I'm not going to be the referee here, but that I'll send everyone, both parents, everything that I do and everything that I want from them, and then it's up to them, that they can't force the other one to buy in.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the idea also of trying to include both parents in the process, I think is, or how many parents are involved, is often important. This is one thing I definitely strive to do, is that even if, let's say, the mom is the one that reaches out and is the main one I have contact with, I like to, I can't always include, the other parent, on the emails and the notes. So this way they're fully engaged and know what's going on, even if maybe they're not available necessarily, let's say, to meet during sessions as much. Because I think it is important to get both parents' perspectives, when they're available, but I think it's hard sometimes, because sometimes I think one parent may take charge more, for different reasons than the other.
And I'm finding a lot more fathers' involvement, a lot, as the primary caretaker or the person bringing them to tutoring. I'm finding a lot more, involvement, which I think is great.
I agree. That's important.
Yeah, and I've definitely, I guess, we're seen more of that as well. And it's interesting. I mean, I guess I also don't know how much with COVID and people's flexible work schedules for some, if that has also changed things in terms of, if like a parent is home, working from home, or to be able to at least know more about what's going on and being able to be more involved than maybe they were before.
Positive thing that came out of COVID is that the families are together and they are seeing the work and the struggles and trying to, navigate and make things better at home.
Some parents were seeing more of the struggles than they ever did, because they could, pop in when the kid was online in his classroom. All of a sudden they realized their child is further behind than they thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've definitely got, over the past, I guess, 2+ years, got a lot of calls from parents that, sort of saw their kid on doing school on Zoom and recognized there's these issues that they said no idea existed.
I'm getting a lot of calls for placement testing. So we're, saying this is a typical end of third grade test. This is what the student is supposed to be able to do pretty much, generally. And we see where they are and see where the holes are.
Yeah, well, and then that's hard, because also figuring out to what degree did distance learning, impact where someone is in terms of, like, are they behind because of, the way the education was set up, or does that not really impact things as much? Like, I think it may depend, I think, also on how engaged the kid was during that process.
For some of the kids, I was going to say, for some of the kids, they felt more comfortable sending their teacher emails or trying to chat with them online than they would if they had to go to the front of the room and talk to the teacher at their desk.
The younger kids really struggled the most, because you have to change what they're doing. Half the time they didn't have a crayon or a pencil or anything, supplies. So the kids that we're getting now, most of them are kindergarten through third. They struggled with online. They didn't learn how to read, and there's holes in the math because they couldn't engage online. They couldn't move around.
Yeah, that's right. And then there are also, I think, kids on the, I think the reverse too, that, to your point, did better online because, for kids that can't sit still, it was nice because they could fidget and stuff and no one would notice or care, as long as they were, somewhere within the screen, or, could or at least or maybe get up more frequently without being a big deal. So I think there are also some kids that I think missed the online option.
Well, learning to read online is, I was going to say, learning to read online is probably impossible for a lot of kids unless the parents had time to be involved and knew what to do.
I had one that was so tech savvy, she put hats on and changed her face and her makeup and the whole time. And I'm like, that was like a strategy, maybe, I don't know, but it was very distracting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think some teachers sort of made it work better than others in terms of using the online stuff when it had to be online. But it's, sort of, I think now is, kind of reality that, for most people, unless you choose the online option, it's not really sort of, what people are doing. So you have to learn to readjust back to being in the classroom.
if the kids learned by multimodalities, there wasn't a lot of hands-on activities that you could do online.
Yeah.
Some
I think
teachers
in
might be
some-
creative.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think, one of the other benefits for some kids that came out of the distance learning was, improvement in executive function skills out of necessity in terms of having to be more independent. But if they didn't have the scaffolding to do that, then that probably didn't go very well. But I think there are some kids that may have been learned to be more resourceful by having to sort of do more themselves, when school is online.
For the older kids in high school, because they wouldn't have classes all the time, I think it sets them up for college because, you have 2 classes a week and the rest of it you have to do independently. So some of that might have helped some of the high school kids.
I think the high school kids were less challenged by this, that it was an easy transition, a better transition. They were much more efficient. There was no wasted time.
Yeah, and I think in some ways it gave kids a sample of what college might be like with, not having classes every day, having an extra day in the middle of the week to just get work done.
And sign up for teachers' hours, which they never had before.
Yeah, and also have to budget their time more in terms of there's
Right.
more time to do work. Plus also with not having class every day. Yeah, I mean, although I guess some kids in schools that block scheduling have that, but the idea is if you get an assignment on Monday and it wasn't due till Thursday, having to figure out when do I plan out my time between now and Thursday to get it done. Whereas if a lot of assignments then normally, you a couple days then, or, you get it one day to the next day, it's sort of, you just do the daily stuff and there's not as much planning that goes into it.
And many schools had Wednesday, to catch up. And some students were great at taking that day and figuring everything out and breaking things down with time management. And some kids did nothing on Wednesday.
You're right. They slept late, they played video games, or they went outside and that was it.
Yeah, so I guess it definitely varies in how kids and teens use their time. Yeah, and this was good. I mean, it's definitely fun kind of chatting about this stuff, and I'm wondering, as we're getting kind of to the point of wrapping up for today, if anyone has any final thoughts or takeaways that they want to share, as a group before we conclude for today.
I always feel energized after these meetings. So that's what I have to say. Thank you all.
Thank
I
you.
always learn
Echo
stuff.
that, and I definitely agree. I love meeting. I'm glad I've been able to do it for so long, and I feel like I always get a lot out of these.
And I always learn something to take away to think about, which I appreciate very much. Thank you all.
Certainly.
Me too. I always get ideas from all of you. So it's great. And it's nice to connect and see people. So hopefully we can bring more people into this group. I know that it used to be quite a lot bigger. I don't know if people have some Zoom fatigue or what, but I think it's still really helpful.